Shabbat Shalom. So we are more than 2 months into the Gaza war since October 7th, and it is hard enough keeping up with the regular news, just what's happening where the various battles are taking place, how many have fallen. It is tricky because, the information in wartime is often hard to come by. However, it is even more difficult keeping up with the actual news when we take into account all of the not actual news, but what seems to dominate the conversation, the outrageous claims of the last few months. And putting them aside is hard. Some of them, aren't too bad. I mean, that is to say, they're terrible claims, but they're not too hard to put aside. Some of our outrageous claims over the last month is that Israel is engaged in genocide. How do we put that claim aside? How do we put it to rest? Oh dear, we've done this one before. Come on. Population has increased over the years, and to claim in genocide, you would need to have not only a decreasing population, but you would need to also prove intent. Genocide is an intentionally determinate crime. If you have no intention of decreasing the population for the purpose of extermination, you're not committing genocide, you're committing war. And for many people, this seems to be a very difficult distinction for them to make. Killing is bad, they reason. You're killing, therefore it must be genocide. That's not how the definition of the word works. War can happen and not be genocidal. In fact, the most wars throughout history have been non-genocidal. The shocking thing of the World War II genocide, as well as the few other genocides that have taken place in modern history, are because they are different than other battles. Most wars are fought over land, and the casualties inflicted are of secondary importance. Wars that are fought over ideology are usually fought in order to claim the new people as part of your ideology, not to eradicate them. Wars are rarely fought for extermination, and thus the burden of proof for anyone claiming genocide has to be on their side to prove that indeed it's Israel's intention to permanently eliminate the population either of Gaza or of Palestinians as a whole, and there is no such proof. We can still be dismayed at death, at any deaths, but we do not have to add the label genocide. Well, what about the claim that Israel is invading Gaza in order to take the land? That this is just part of Israel's normal behavior, quotes, normal behavior, of seizing land from innocent other people. Is Israel trying to take back Gaza? No. There is no evidence whatsoever of any intention to permanently relocate the population, apart from the militant group Hamas, away from that territory, and there is even less evidence that Israel is interested in moving its own citizenry into the territory of Gaza. Israel did that a few decades ago, and then decided that it wasn't such a great place to be, and moved the people out. Indeed, that's how Gaza came to be eventually under the control of Hamas, because of Israel's withdrawal, and then how the Palestinians administered that transition is what led to Hamas's occupation of that territory. So, no, there is no evidence whatsoever that Israel wants to stay in Gaza or move anybody in Gaza or even officially move any of the innocent people out of Gaza. It is not a land grab. What about the claim that Israel is committing massive war crimes? It's a little trickier, right? Because we do have to concede that crimes can happen during war. That is a technically true statement. And we need point no further than the unfortunate killing of the Israeli hostages that had escaped by the Israeli soldiers. Shooting somebody carrying a white flag is, and under the orders to hold fire, is probably a war crime. That is not how they are supposed to behave, and the fact that the victims were Israelis shows that this is not a blatant issue. This is simply a accident was created by one small group of people. That there will be accidents that happen that could have been avoided with better trigger discipline, rules of engagement, etc. But in order to prove a war crime, again, we have to go back to actual definitions. To prove a war crime, you have to improve intentionality, and you have to prove that it was designed to inflict the criminal act more than achieve any military objective. If I think somebody's launching missiles at me and I bomb them back, and some people who are killed by that bomb happen to not be involved in the use of the missiles, that is not a war crime. It is a tragedy, especially made more common by the use of civilian locations for the launching of such missiles, but it is not a war crime. Even if Israel had known that there would be collateral damage, people killed that were not actively involved in the military action, it would still not be a war crime because it is easy to demonstrate that the attack on the missile site was the primary objective and any additional casualties were not the goal. Not too hard. Yes, got a hand over there. Oh, so yes, absolutely. Proving all of the various things I've just mentioned as being war crimes or problems from the Hamas side is easy, right? Hamas categorically claims that they wish to eradicate all Jews, not only in Israel, but around the world. Hamas categorically will commit war crimes, not only the use of civilian areas for military operations, but all of October 7th is classified as a war crime, except for the few soldiers that they targeted. The vast majority of their victims were innocent and were attacked not only as innocent, but in most brutal fashion. And we know that Hamas has a stated goal of ethnic cleansing of Israel, the taking of that territory, and land seizures is absolutely their goal. So yes, it's easy to prove that everything that is being leveled against Israel is actually true about Hamas. Unfortunately, the people who make such accusations don't care about that, which we're getting to. But exactly right, yes. If we flip hold up a mirror to the acts, the claims stick a whole lot better. But there is one of the outrageous claims that has been floated so much more over the last couple months that it's been lingering around for a while, not just since 1975, and that is that all of this, from root to stem, is about racism. I know. Whenever I talk to Jewish groups about this, they look at me like I'm, smoking something. And I never have, didn't inhale either. Yes, there is a large proportion of people, globally and as well as nationally, who believe that this entire situation can best be understood through the lens of racism. You may remember in 1975, or for those of you that are a bit younger, you may have read in history books that in 1975, the United Nations General Assembly passed a very famous resolution which claimed Zionism is racism. Great, very helpful, very useful. What in the world were they thinking when they passed that resolution? What was the logic underpinning that resolution? And how does that continue to play out in the rhetoric over the situation now, and underline why no one wants to hold up the mirror to Hamas to show that what they are doing is actually committing the crimes and atrocities and other things of which Israel is accused. All right, well, let's break it down. What is the underlying claim of racism within the Jewish situation and Israel, Zionism, all of that together? Well, to understand it, first you have to understand that for many people, they view the lens of international relations and especially post-colonial politics through the lens of racism. That what happened during the colonial period, the period where Europeans went around the world and colonized different places, either with population or for resource extraction, that was a fundamentally racist agenda. Now, there's an underlying problem with that assumption, because most of the places that went around doing these things, whether it be England, Spain, Holland, or Germany, Italy, any of the other groups that engaged in that type of colonialism, did not do so with explicit racist claims. They just sort of used racism to justify it after the fact. If they had not had racism to justify why they should be allowed to take something away from another population, they would have come up with other excuses, as they did routinely when attacking each other's borders and taking things away from each other. So it is not as though this was founded upon an innate understanding of racial superiority. Racial superiority was simply a convenient cover story for the typical greed of nations. But if you were living under that type of occupation, if you were in a country that had been colonized or exploited by a European power that used racially laden rhetoric, you believed that that's what they meant. You believed that that was an actual justification. You accepted that these white people were always going to always feel superior to anyone that wasn't white, and that they therefore felt justified to take things from the non-whites around the world. Everybody with me so far? Again, I'm not saying this is real, but I am saying this is a very common perception. And indeed, many places around the world had to found their anti-colonial identity around a racial typeset. They had been classified by their race, and thus they had to unify around their race to fight back. If they are going to treat us as those people, meaning some racial group, then we are going to be that people, meaning this racial group, and we are going to fight back against that racial group. You can see how the idea of using racial typing as a cover story for colonial oppression wasn't a great idea, Europeans, because it had a lasting impact beyond just justifying the atrocities of those centuries. It has warped the perception of many national identities around the world, not only those that are fond of white supremacy, but also those outside. And then it creates a lens that if you see a situation where there is a racial minority, meaning non-European, which, by the way, is the majority of the planet, but we'll talk about that some other day. But if you see a place that is often classified as a racial minority or racially oppressed or racially disadvantaged group, and you see another group that is not part of that racial party, then which side must be the oppressor? The white guys. Right? It is the ultimate inverse of the old Western cowboy trope. The guy in the black hat must be the hero, the guy in the white hat must be the villain, because that's the way history has unfolded. All right, so that part of the calculation is very simple. Well, kind of, it took about 5 minutes. But what is the other part of the calculation with regards to Israel? Jews are white people. All right, we got to make that claim stick, don't we? Jews are white people. Now, I will say from personal experience and personal identity, I don't classify myself as white. When I was growing up, I did not consider myself to be white. Now, that's partly because I have family that were told they weren't white. Both my mother as well as my grandmother and other relatives have experienced overt oppression because of their Hispanic heritage. Being denied admittance to place because of the color of their skin, being just a shade too dark, and otherwise being called various racial epithets that I'm not going to repeat here within the sanctuary, against those of, quote, Mexican ancestry, even though my family is not technically Mexican by the definition of that national group. We can talk about my family history some other time, but I grew up with those stories. I grew up with that identity. I knew that among white supremacists, I wasn't white. Not just because I was Jewish, but I wasn't white because that part of my family was Hispanic, and white supremacists are very, very clear that one drop disqualifies you. They are very, very clear on that, and it's convenient because it means more and more people get disqualified from their ranks every year, and that means that there are fewer and fewer people who could even give them allegiance. But I knew from a very early age that among those who keep track of race on the white spectrum, I would never qualify to be part of their club. So I never considered myself white. As I grew older and began to research, I found that the granddaddy of all racial typists, the pseudoscience of racial typing that began in the late 1800s, they were even more vehement that far from it being my Hispanic roots that disqualified me for entry into the club of whiteness, it was my Jewish roots that disqualified me from being in that club. And when they began to put together their hierarchies of racial typing throughout that pseudoscience of European thought on race in the 1800s, Jews were at the bottom of the barrel. And by bottom of the barrel, I mean below any other racial group on the planet. Hence the Holocaust, which was indeed a genocide about race, even if we're not a race, because the people who were running the gas chambers classified us as a genetically transmitted disease, as a racial disease that would poison the world. This was what we know as Jews. We've hopefully all learned at least some of these elements, even if you have a different family background than me. We know roughly what the Holocaust is about, and thus it comes as some shock when people say Jews are white people. Because by white people standards, that is to say the people with a capital W white, we certainly are not. So why do they call us white? Well, it comes down to a couple of factors. One is many of the people who are making these claims are people who have mostly interacted with Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews. And you know what? Much to the racist chagrin, if you put a bunch of Ashkenazi Jews in a room with a bunch of other people from Poland or Germany or Lithuania or Russia, you're not going to see huge differences. There might be a little bit of difference of the percentage of people blonde in one population versus another, but walk through a room with 1,000 people collected at random from those major ethnic groups, and the Jews are going to fit in just fine, and you are going to have a hard time being able to just pick out who the Jew is. So, much to the racist chagrin, we actually do look white in the eyes of people that are not already racist, in the eyes of people that are not already trying to stereotype us into particular pigeonholes. Remember, we know this to be true because otherwise you wouldn't need to make Jews wear distinctive clothing or items if they would be identified at sight as being Jewish because of their genetic makeup. Everybody following that logic? Right? You don't have to wear a yellow star if there is some other distinguishing feature about Jews that screams, this is a Jew, beyond doubt. Hence the usage of various identifying clothing. Okay, so Jews kind of look white if you're only looking at Ashkenazi Jews. There are more than Ashkenazi Jews in the world. In fact, the majority of the Israeli population is either Sephardi, Mizrahi, or heavily mixed between Ashkenazi and all of those groups. And so, no, you do not see a white Israel the way that you saw a white South Africa. However, if you're not actually looking at the Israelis, if you're not actually looking at a standard sanctuary, even in the United States, it doesn't matter. Because the funny thing is if you deal in stereotypes, it's quite easy to portray Jews as being white people. If you actually deal in reality, it becomes impossible to stereotype us as being white people. We defy categorization along racial grounds for the obvious reason that we're not a race. That Judaism is built into a religious and cultural framework, not genetics, which is why nowhere in Jewish law does your blood matter. Right? Nothing in your DNA ever determines if you're Jewish or not. As the most common cited proof of this is in vitro fertilization. If you are going to have a surrogate mother, is the child Jewish depending upon the egg or depending upon the womb? The womb. The womb. You can have all the DNA that's Jewish. The father could be Jewish, the mother could be Jewish, the egg can be mixed in the test tube and planted in a non-Jewish mother. When that child is born, the child is non-Jewish. And if taken as surrogacy for the Jewish couple, you take that child as a baby to the mikveh. The child has to be converted. And alternatively, if there is a Jewish father and a Jewish mother that can't conceive on their own, and they use other forms of fertility treatments that have a non-Jewish sperm and a non-Jewish egg, and it is implanted within the Jewish mother's womb, and then she gives birth. What is the identity of the child? Jewish. Right? Judaism is not in the blood, it is in the family. And I know that a lot of people nowadays have difficulty differentiating between that, but we've been doing it for 3,000 years, so it kind of makes sense to us. Doesn't make sense to others unless they want to stop and ask us. But they're not going to. Which comes back to the fundamental question of why are we even talking about racism in the first place? I mean, let's be honest. If you were going to say, this group over here is committing war crimes, genocide, land seizures, and they're also racist. I mean, is that like in the same category of crime? If someone commits genocide but they're not racist, do we give them a free pass? I mean, is that like okay? Is racism somehow the ultimate expression of evil? More so than genocide or war crimes or any of the other outrageous claims they make against Israel and us? No. But racism has a wonderful advantage, which, as long as you don't look too carefully at it, is going to be exploited as much as possible by those that are opposed to Israel or Jews, which is, it's a great point of bringing together an alliance to oppose something. As I said earlier, wars have been fought throughout history, and people have been killed in wars throughout history, as they say, otherwise it'd just be a lot of nasty shouting and shoving. Those wars were just accepted as part of life. Indeed, even to this day, there are wars that are fought along the borders of Pakistan and China, Pakistan and India, India and China, all throughout Central and South America. People cross borders to attack and hurt each other all the time, and different places around the world. No one uses the term genocide. No one uses the term war crimes unless they're being very, very technical. No one uses the term racism. Why? Well, because those are just normal wars. But if we really want to galvanize people against something, then we have to tap into the zeitgeist of the rest of the world, something that, again, we may have difficulty comprehending coming from the United States or perhaps from other parts of Europe. But for the rest of the world, the claim of racism is a trump card. That if you can prove that one side is motivated by racial ideology, then you can say that their actions are the same as the colonial ideology of the earlier centuries. And once that happens, all debate is done. We now know who's the oppressor. We now know who we must support. Racism in the hands of many other parts of the world, in their lexicon, becomes the end of the discussion. Prove the claim of racism as the motivation and have a white-looking group that is perpetrating these racial acts, and I don't need to investigate anything further. Now I know who I have to support. And indeed, this is exactly how this topic has been used in other parts of the world, and unfortunately within certain certain groups within the U.S. that are more prone to that type of identity political thinking and liberation ideology. Portray Jews as white, portray their victims as being from a different race, trot out the story of colonial racial oppression, and nothing that Israel does can be justified. Because it's no different than what England did, no different than what France and Holland and Germany and Belgium and all the other colonial actions throughout the last few centuries did. And we all know those were terrible and wrong. Therefore, this too must be terrible and wrong. Even fighting back to defend themselves is terrible and wrong because it's a colonial racial oppressive state. Therefore, even defending itself is merely perpetrating its colonial oppressive racial regime. It is remarkably elegant in its simplicity. And because it is simple, it sells well. And because it reinforces a narrative that many around the world have already decided is always categorically true, that those that are white must be the oppressor, those that are the non-white must not be the oppressor, it means it captivates all of the audience and settles all of the debate. So what do? Well, one, we try to prove over and over again that we're not racist. Now, that can be a little challenging because, unfortunately, while Judaism is not racist and while Israel as a state is not racist, there are racist Jews. It is much to our shame that Jews are like everyone else, only more so, that there are Jews that are racists. I have met them. They are not invisible, unfortunately. But they are a minority among the Jewish population. They are a smaller group. We need to make sure that we are standing up for those that are subject to racial oppression. We need to make sure that we are also standing up against prejudice of any kind, regardless of the source. That is to say, prejudice that comes from people of color towards others needs to also be called out as prejudice. And prejudice that comes from people that are white needs to be called out as prejudice. And that's hard, because that gets you no friends. That gets you no allies, because most people want you to score points for their team. They don't want you to score points for what's right. Well, sorry, we're Jewish. Our job is not just to hit home runs for our team. Our job is to actually defend what is right. And all of humanity was made b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Therefore, all of humanity deserves kavod, deserves honor and respect. We have to be the champions of that equally across the board. We also have to condemn anytime we do hear racist Jewish rhetoric. And that can be painful. When we hear the occasional Israeli politician trot out racial epithets against the people of Gaza or anywhere else in the world, we have to say, look, no, wrong. No, that's racist, and that is not our motivation, nor does that represent who we are. We agree with the right of Israel to self-defense, but not because of the difference of skin color between one side of the border and the other, but because they attack and try to murder us, and that can be defended against without shame, not because of our race, but just because of our humanity. I thought I saw a hand coming up over here. Yes? Mm-mm. Right. Yep. And Let me summarize for those of you that are not able to hear everything in the room, because it was very well put, but I'm going to have to cut it down for the repeat. But the question is, or rather the statement followed by a question is, a lot of people don't seem interested in the truth, that Israel and Jews can teach what I just mentioned about IVF, teach about what people can become Jewish regarding other race, teach about Jewish history of working with other racial groups to try and defend their rights and their civil liberties, and yet they won't care. Because their lie trumps any fact, any evidence, and any other information that might contradict what they have already decided for themselves must be the truth. Why is that? Now, I saw another hand before I get to the why is that. Mm-hmm. Yes. I have never heard that argument before. Oh, well, then you're lucky because you haven't been in those circles. But yes, no, that is a very common claim, that any claim against Hamas is a lie. And any claim that is against Hamas, Israel probably did it worse anyway. Even though there's no evidence for Israeli atrocities at all on the same scale, let alone equivalent to the Hamas activities, that lie is very common, because who wants to defend a group that did what Hamas did? Therefore, what they did must be a lie. They must not have actually done that. That's the underlying logic. Now, we're going to come back to why we can't, very much like Holocaust denial, only in real time. Although, the great joke about Holocaust denial is the people who actually committed the Holocaust admit it. Go ask Germany whether the Holocaust happened, and they will tell you categorically, yes, we did it, we were terrible. It's people who are not German that try to deny their own confession. It's great irony there. Daniel.
You just used the word real time. Real time is I think, a big part of our problem. We get our news in real time, and what we get is videos and pictures, and I think for many, many people, history started yesterday. And in real time, they saw the suffering and death of 1,200 Israelis. And then, displacing that in real time, they see the suffering and death of tens of thousands of Gazans. Therefore, the Gazans are the bigger sufferers.
Right. Whoever has the worst pictures must be the true victim for today. And were Hamas to unleash some catastrophic attack, God forbid, then sympathy would switch back. Now, that's among the people with loose sympathy, where it will shift back and forth depending upon what their Instagram feed is giving them. But there are some people that are more durable. That is to say, their sympathies will lie with one group or the other, regardless of any evidence one way or the other. And that comes back to Monique's question about, where did truth go? Well, I'm going to give you the very short answer of this, because this is a much longer sermon that I wasn't actually planning to give today, but it is an excellent question because it does get to that next level. And I'll be happy to talk about it ad nauseum, as long as you're willing to put up with me during Kiddush, because it is something that I am known to hold forth about with the right audience. Truth died when the institutions that used to be the guarantors of truth showed themselves to be corrupt. We used to have institutions that we thought were reliable measurers of truth. We had universities, we had governments, we had media, we had various religious authorities, and for thousands of years, those institutions gave truth. Now, they didn't usually give good truth. They often gave very flawed truth. But the truth that they gave was accepted as true, and the veneer of respectability, of reliability, of honesty was enduring. Those colleges that you and I both went to that gave the impression that we are truth seekers, and honest, they were trying to still publish what they needed to publish to get their grants, and they were willing to distort data in order to make something slightly more sensational, and they were willing to play the games within their departments in order to try and get their tenure. They were not truth seekers in the pure Galileo model that we have as our idol. The politicians of Lincoln and of Washington and Jefferson, they were not truth seekers and truth tellers. They had their own agendas, and they were more than happy to stab each other in the back and dissemble and lie as needed. So too the religious institutions, which were exposed horribly as corrupt throughout the 1800s and then into the 1900s, and continuing with revelation after revelation of not only corruption but abuse and scandal. So who do we turn to for the actual truth? Who would we turn to for the truth? The media? I think we can already agree that none one here is going to agree that we're going to look at the same news channel and say, oh, it's Walter Cronkite, it must be true. So when you have no institutions that are dependable, that are trusted collectively, that we have shared and to say these are true, then I get to make up my own. And when I have a real-time way of looking at the world, when history begins yesterday, why would I look beyond the validation, gratification, and sense of approval of my current chosen community for parroting the truth of this group? What is superior? Right? The history from 100 years ago that was written by some guy that probably beat his slaves and wouldn't give his wife the vote? His book on what the Palestinian Jewish situation is, that's the one I should listen to? He had the real truth? Why would I accept the truth of yesterday when yesterday has proven itself to be corrupt? Why would I accept the truth of today's institution when they routinely prove themselves to be corrupt? Therefore, if no one is a reliable source of truth, I get to make my own. And if I get to make my own, I'm going to pick the one that currently works with whatever social group I have that's going to give me the gold star for liking or parroting whatever the talking points are. And this transcends beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into most aspects of our life. Because we have rightfully exposed the hypocrisy and crimes of the institutions that used to be the guarantors of truth, we have exposed ourselves to have no guarantor of truth. And because we are unwilling to actually do the uncomfortable work of trying to create such a shared understanding that truly is living up to the ideals of proper, rigorous inquiry, open to proper, rigorous critique, because we're not willing to take the criticisms of our community for daring to support an idea that is outside of the norm, which is what is essential for any proper investigation, because we're not willing to accept the criticism of our own community because we are daring to say something that has not already been pre-approved, then we are all complicit in maintaining a truthless society. And as such, the claims of genocide, war crimes, and racism should come as no surprise, because you can claim anything when there is nothing that we will agree upon is capable of countering those claims. We have worked ourselves into the situation because we rightfully overthrew the idols of antiquity that claimed truth and offered nothing. But having overthrown the idols, we haven't actually replaced them truly with the crown of truth. Because that's hard work. That's really hard work. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, as the truth should be. But as our tradition says, the truth is the crown of God. Ultimately, emet is the foundation. And ultimately, our society will only survive if we can willingly come together and fight for the truth together. Because the truth of one is a lie to another. The truth of all of us is the only thing that can endure. Shabbat Shalom.